A racist police officer sees an innocent black girl drawing on the sidewalk and arrests her for no reason. Afterwards, he realizes that he has just arrested the daughter of the mayor. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, the kind Jasmine Bennett loved. She knelt on the pavement in front of her house, her box of chalks beside her, carefully coloring in the final strokes of her drawing. Her parents didn't mind her drawing on the public street. They'd told her it was fine as long as she stayed close to home. The street was empty anyway, so she had all the space she needed to create her bright world of flowers, animals, and a giant smiling sun. Her small hands worked swiftly, adding the last touches of blue to the sky. Almost done, she whispered to herself, grinning at her masterpiece. Her animals looked happy, playing under the sun she had drawn right in the middle of the road. Jasmine was so absorbed in her drawing that she didn't hear the car pulling up behind her. She barely had time to notice the shadow fall over her before a sharp voice cut through the warm afternoon air. "Hey!" someone barked. Jasmine jumped, her piece of yellow chalk slipping from her hand. She spun around to see a tall police officer walking toward her, his face hard and unreadable. His heavy boots crunched on the pavement, and in an instant, Jasmine's smile faded into confusion. "Hi, officer," she said softly, unsure of what to do. "Is something wrong?" Officer Greg Turner stopped just a few feet away, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the colorful drawings spread across the street. The bright chalk pictures, innocent and cheerful to anyone else, only seemed to annoy him. He looked back at Jasmine, his face set in a deep frown. "You can't be doing this here," he said sternly, pointing at the chalk drawings. "This isn't your property." Jasmine blinked, her wide eyes flicking from her artwork to the officer. "But I wasn't doing anything bad," she said in a small voice. "I'm just drawing." Turner didn't soften. His expression stayed hard as though she'd committed some terrible crime. "You're marking up public property," he said firmly. "You can't just do whatever you want." Jasmine's heart pounded faster. "But I didn't know," she stammered, the tears already welling up in her eyes. "I thought it was okay." Before she could say anything more, the front door of a house across the street swung open, and out stepped Diane Patterson. Jasmine recognized her immediately. Patterson always seemed to be watching her, but she never said anything. Today, though, her face was set in a smug smile. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Diane called out, walking over. She glanced at Jasmine, her lips curling in distaste. "I'm glad someone's finally handling this. She's been making a mess out here for days." Jasmine's heart sank even further. "But I'm just drawing," she said quietly, almost pleading now. "It's just chalk." Diane waved her hand dismissively, her voice cold. "I've seen enough. This isn't a playground," she said sharply. "You can't just let these kids mark up the street like this. It brings down the whole neighborhood." Jasmine's eyes darted back to Officer Turner, but his frown had deepened. He wasn't interested in hearing more. "I'm going to need you to come with me," he said, his voice final. The words hit Jasmine like a heavy blow. "No!" she cried, stepping back. "Please, I'll stop. I'll clean it up. My dad's inside. You can ask him." Turner didn't care. Without another word, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the squad car parked a few feet away. Jasmine struggled, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't do anything wrong," she sobbed. "Please, don't take me away." But Officer Turner ignored her, reaching for his handcuffs. The metal clicked around her small wrists, cold and tight. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, and her legs shook as the officer opened the back door of the car and pushed her inside. As the door slammed shut, Jasmine pressed her tear-streaked face against the window, watching her bright chalk drawings fade from view. The animals, the flowers, the big smiling sun, everything she had spent all afternoon creating, were left behind on the street, just like her. Jasmine sat in the back of the squad car, her hands trembling against the cold steel of the handcuffs. The tears streamed down her face as she stared out of the window, watching her colorful chalk drawings slowly fade away as the car pulled away from her house. The drawings, once so bright and full of joy, now seemed distant, like they belonged to someone else. Her heart pounded against her chest, her mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. How had things gone so wrong? It was just chalk. She didn't understand why the officer was treating her like a criminal. Everything felt like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. Officer Greg Turner glanced in the rearview mirror, his face still hard, showing no sympathy for the young girl crying in the back seat. He didn't see a little girl. He saw a troublemaker, someone who needed to be taught a lesson. "Quiet down back there," he barked, his voice sharp and impatient. Jasmine tried to hold back her sobs, her small body shaking as she struggled to wipe her face with her cuffed hands. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to do anything wrong. It was just drawing." Turner's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "You were vandalizing public property," he said, his tone cold. "You can't just go around marking up streets like that. There are consequences for breaking the law." Jasmine's tears kept falling, her face hot with confusion and fear. "But it was just chalk," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I wasn't hurting anything." The officer didn't respond. To him, it didn't matter if it was chalk, paint, or spray cans. Rules were rules, and she had broken them. He had a job to do, and in his eyes, that was all there was to it. The car pulled into the parking lot of the police station, and Jasmine's stomach twisted into knots. The station was a large, intimidating building made of dull gray bricks, its windows high and unwelcoming. Jasmine had never been anywhere like this before. She had always thought of the police as people who helped, people who would protect her. But now, as the car slowed to a stop and Officer Turner stepped out, she wasn't so sure. The back door swung open, and Turner reached in, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her out of the car. Jasmine stumbled slightly, the weight of the cuffs making it hard to keep her balance. She was small, and the cuffs felt far too big for her wrists, biting into her skin every time she moved. The officer led her into the station, his grip firm and unrelenting. The fluorescent lights inside the station were harsh, casting long shadows against the walls. Jasmine looked around, her wide eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Everything felt cold, emotionless. Turner marched her down a long hallway, his footsteps echoing off the walls. "We're going to process you for vandalism," he said flatly, as if this was the most routine thing in the world. "You'll wait here until we get your paperwork sorted out." Jasmine's heart raced faster. She had no idea what that meant. "Process me?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. She was led into a room where another officer glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. He wasn't used to seeing someone so young brought in, especially not in handcuffs. "What's the story here?" he asked, glancing from Turner to Jasmine and back again. "Caught her marking up the street with chalk," Turner said, his voice full of authority, as though this were a serious crime. "Public property, no permission." The other officer's eyebrows rose even higher, but he didn't say anything, only nodding slowly. Jasmine's eyes were wide with terror, her hands trembling as Turner pulled her closer to the desk. "Please," she whispered again. "I didn't mean to." Before she could finish, the door to the station burst open with a loud bang. "Where is she?" a voice boomed, filled with anger and disbelief. Jasmine's head snapped toward the door, her heart skipping a beat as she saw her father, Andre Bennett, storming into the station. His face was a mask of fury, his usual calm demeanor gone in an instant. "I want to know why my daughter is sitting in this station in handcuffs," Andre demanded, his voice echoing through the room. His eyes were locked on Turner, and there was no mistaking the rage behind them. Turner, surprised by the sudden interruption, straightened up but didn't release his grip on Jasmine. "Sir, this girl was caught vandalizing public property," he said, his voice still trying to maintain authority. "We had a call." Andre cut him off, stepping closer, his body radiating with anger. "She's 9 years old. She was drawing with chalk in front of our house," he snapped, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous." Turner didn't flinch. "Rules are rules, sir," he said coldly. "She was marking up public property. We don't make exceptions just because she's a kid." Andre's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with barely controlled fury. He looked down at his daughter, her face streaked with tears, her small wrists cuffed together. The sight made his blood boil. "You handcuffed my daughter," he said slowly, his voice dangerously low. "For drawing with chalk?" Turner stood his ground. "Sir, this isn't about the chalk. It's about public property being defaced." Andre's fists clenched at his sides. "You think this is defacing property?" he shouted, his voice shaking with outrage. "This is how you treat a child who's playing outside her home?" By now, other officers had gathered around, watching the scene unfold. Tension hung in the air, thick and heavy. One of the senior officers, sensing the situation was spiraling out of control, stepped forward. "Let's calm down here," he said, holding his hands up. "Maybe we should call the captain." Andre didn't take his eyes off Turner. "You better call her now," he said through gritted teeth, his voice barely above a growl. "Before I do." The tension in the police station was thick, almost suffocating. Andre Bennett stood tall, his fists clenched at his sides as he glared at Officer Turner. Jasmine, her small frame trembling, clung to her father's leg, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion and fear. Other officers lingered nearby, exchanging uneasy glances, unsure of how to handle the situation spiraling out of control. "I want these cuffs off my daughter," Andre demanded, his voice low and controlled, though the rage simmering beneath his words was unmistakable. Now, Officer Greg Turner stood firm, his expression hard, determined to maintain control of the situation. He wasn't backing down. "Sir, as I said before, your daughter was vandalizing public property," he replied, his tone rigid. "We follow the rules here, and that's what I'm doing." Andre took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "She's a 9-year-old girl, drawing with chalk on the street in front of her house. And you arrested her," he growled, his voice rising. "You put handcuffs on her." Turner didn't flinch, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Sir, it's still public property. She was defacing it." "I'm just following protocol," he repeated, though the words came out less confidently this time. Before Andre could respond, the door at the back of the station swung open with force, and in walked Police Captain Evelyn Moore. She was a tall, no-nonsense woman with years of experience, and her eyes immediately scanned the room, taking in the scene in front of her. She had been alerted to the situation by another officer, and she wasn't pleased with what she saw. As Captain Moore approached, her gaze fell on Andre. Her eyes widened slightly, a look of recognition flashing across her face. This wasn't just an angry parent. This was Andre Bennett, the mayor. Her pace quickened, and she moved directly toward them, her posture stiffening with a mix of professionalism and urgency. "What's going on here?" Captain Moore asked, her voice sharp as she shot a look at Turner, who instantly straightened under her scrutiny. "Captain, I was handling a report of vandalism," Turner began, trying to maintain his composure. "This girl was drawing on the street with chalk, public property. I followed standard procedure and—" Captain Moore cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "You handcuffed a 9-year-old girl for drawing with chalk," she said, her voice cold, her eyes narrowing as she looked between Turner and the handcuffed child. Her jaw tightened as she turned to face Andre directly. "Mr. Bennett, Andre interrupted, his tone biting. "You put my daughter in handcuffs. For chalk. Captain, this is completely unacceptable." Moore's face flushed slightly, and she immediately realized the gravity of the situation. Her mind raced. The mayor's daughter in handcuffs? This was not going to go well. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "Mr. Bennett, I deeply apologize," she said, her tone more formal now. "This should never have happened." Andre didn't relax, his glare still firmly on Turner. "Damn right it shouldn't have." Captain Moore turned to Officer Turner, her voice icy. "Take those cuffs off her, now." Turner hesitated, glancing between the captain and Andre. He opened his mouth to protest, but one look from Captain Moore silenced him. With stiff hands, he pulled out his keys and removed the cuffs from Jasmine's wrists, the metal clinking as they fell away. Jasmine immediately rushed into her father's arms, her small body shaking as she buried her face against his chest. Andre knelt down and wrapped his arms around her, his face softening as he whispered gently into her ear. "It's okay, baby. It's over now," he said, though the anger still simmered beneath his words. Captain Moore watched the scene unfold, her stomach sinking. She knew this was a disaster, and she had to act quickly to contain the fallout. She turned to Turner, her face stony. "Officer Turner, step outside, now." Turner's jaw clenched, and for a moment, it looked like he was going to argue. But something in the captain's expression warned him against it. Without a word, he turned on his heel and left the room, his posture stiff with frustration. Once Turner was gone, Captain Moore faced Andre and Jasmine again, her tone softer but still filled with urgency. "Mr. Bennett, again, I deeply apologize for what's happened here," she said carefully. "This was handled poorly, and I will personally see to it that there are consequences for Officer Turner's actions." Andre stood, still holding Jasmine close, his eyes cold as he regarded the captain. "This is more than just a mistake," he said, his voice low. "This is about how this department handles situations like this. And if things don't change, I will make sure everyone knows what happened here today." Captain Moore didn't flinch under his gaze, but she nodded solemnly. "I understand, sir. I will handle this internally, and I will ensure that changes are made." Andre didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at Jasmine, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "We're leaving," he said firmly, his eyes returning to Captain Moore. "But this isn't over." Captain Moore nodded once more, understanding the weight of his words. "Thank you for your patience, Mr. Bennett," she said quietly. "I will be in contact with you about how we move forward." Without another word, Andre turned and led Jasmine out of the station, holding her close as they stepped into the cool afternoon air. Jasmine sniffled softly, looking up at her father with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small and uncertain. "Why did they arrest me?" I wasn't doing anything wrong. Andre's heart ached at her question, and he knelt down in front of her, his large hands gently resting on her shoulders. You didn't do anything wrong, baby, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Sometimes, people just don't see things the way they should. Jasmine blinked, her innocent face still full of confusion. But it was just chalk, she whispered. Andre smiled sadly, brushing a stray curl away from her face. I know, sweetheart. I know. As they walked back to the car, Jasmine held tight to her father's hand. The battle for justice would come next. But for now, Andre focused on what mattered most, getting his daughter home, safe in his arms. The sun hung lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the street as Andre and Jasmine made their way to Diane Patterson's house. Andre's jaw was tight, his stride purposeful. Jasmine clung to his hand, her small frame still trembling from the day's events. She had been quiet since they left the police station. But now, as they neared the neighbor's house, her eyes darted nervously toward her father, sensing the anger radiating from him. Daddy, she whispered softly, why are we going to Mrs. Patterson's house? Andre's voice was calm, but his anger was simmering just below the surface. We need to talk to her, Jasmine, he said, his eyes fixed on the front door ahead. She's the one who called the police. Jasmine's grip tightened on her father's hand, her heart pounding in her chest. But why would she call them? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just drawing. Andre stopped walking for a moment and knelt down to her level, looking into her tear-filled eyes. I know, baby, he said softly, gently cupping her face in his hands. You didn't do anything wrong, but sometimes people don't see things the way they should. And that's why we need to talk to her. Jasmine sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. I was just drawing animals and flowers, Daddy, she said, her voice breaking slightly. And then the policeman came. He yelled at me and told me to stop, but I didn't know why. I tried to tell him that I wasn't hurting anything, but he wouldn't listen. And then he put handcuffs on me. Hearing those words from his daughter made Andre's chest tighten with a fresh wave of anger. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm for Jasmine's sake. I know, sweetheart, he said, his voice shaking slightly. And I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Jasmine hesitated for a moment, then asked quietly, how did you know I was at the police station? Andre's face softened as he thought back to the moment he got the call. When the police arrested you, one of the officers called me. As soon as I found out, I went straight there, he said, his voice filled with emotion. I couldn't believe they had done that to you. Jasmine's lip quivered and she whispered, I was so scared, Daddy. I didn't know what was going to happen. Andre pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. I know, baby, but I came as soon as I knew, and I won't let anything like this happen to you again. After a moment, they pulled away from each other, and Andre stood up, his expression hardening once more. Now, he said, we need to make sure Mrs. Patterson understands what she did. They continued walking toward Diane's house, and when they reached the porch, Andre knocked firmly on the door. Jasmine stayed close to him, her small hand still wrapped around his. A moment later, the door opened, revealing Diane Patterson standing there with a look of surprise on her face. Mr. Bennett, Diane said, her voice tight. What brings you here? Andre's eyes narrowed, his voice calm but filled with barely contained anger. We need to talk, he said. About what happened today. Diane glanced down at Jasmine, and a brief flash of guilt crossed her face. She quickly composed herself, crossing her arms over her chest. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Andre took a step closer, his voice steady but firm. You called the police on my daughter for drawing with chalk on the street in front of our house. Diane's face flushed slightly, and she shifted her weight uncomfortably. Well, she was marking up public property, she said defensively. I didn't know who she was, and I have every right to call if I think someone's damaging the neighborhood. Jasmine's eyes filled with fresh tears as she looked up at Diane, hurt and confused. But I wasn't doing anything bad, she whispered. I was just drawing pictures. Diane avoided Jasmine's gaze, her face turning a shade paler. I wasn't trying to cause any trouble. I just thought, you thought a 9-year-old girl drawing on the street was a threat. Andre interrupted, his voice rising. You didn't ask questions. You didn't even try to figure out what was going on. You just saw her and assumed the worst. Diane opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she glanced nervously between Andre and Jasmine, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. Andre stepped even closer, his voice quiet, but filled with intensity. You called the police, and because of you, my daughter was arrested. She was put in handcuffs. Do you understand how terrifying that was for her? Do you even care? Diane's face flushed even deeper with embarrassment. I I didn't realize it would go that far, she stammered. I didn't mean for her to get hurt. But she did get hurt, Andre shot back, his voice sharp. Because you didn't take a second to think before you picked up that phone. Jasmine sniffled again, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I wasn't trying to be bad, she whispered softly, her voice trembling. I just wanted to make pretty pictures. For the first time, Diane's expression softened. She looked down at Jasmine, guilt washing over her features. I'm sorry, she muttered, barely able to meet their eyes. I didn't mean to scare you, Jasmine. I really didn't. Andre watched her carefully, his anger still simmering beneath the surface. You're going to remember this, he said, his voice firm. You're going to remember how you made her feel. And you're going to think twice before you ever make a call like that again. Diane nodded quickly, clearly uncomfortable. I will, she said quietly. I'm really sorry. Without another word, Andre turned to Jasmine, his expression softening as he knelt down beside her. Come on, baby. Let's go home. As they walked away from Diane's house, Jasmine held tightly to her father's hand, her head still swirling with emotions. Daddy, she said softly, is she really sorry? Andre sighed, looking down at her with a sad smile. I think she is, sweetheart, he said quietly. But that doesn't change what happened. And that's why we have to make sure it never happens again. Jasmine nodded, still holding on to his hand as they walked back toward their house. She didn't fully understand everything that had happened, but one thing was clear. Her father was always there for her, no matter what. And as they stepped inside their home, Andre knew that while the day's battle was over, the fight for justice was just beginning. The next morning, Andre stood in front of the police station once again, his jaw set with determination. He had promised Jasmine that he would make things right, and today, he was going to take the first step in holding Officer Turner accountable. As he stepped through the front doors, the memory of his daughter in handcuffs flashed in his mind, reigniting the anger that had barely subsided since the day before. Inside the station, the usual bustle of activity greeted him, but Andre's presence drew a few uneasy glances from the officers milling around. They recognized him now, not just as the mayor, but as the father of the little girl Turner had arrested. Andre walked straight to the front desk, his voice calm but firm. I need to speak to Captain Moore. The officer behind the desk nodded quickly. Right away, Mr. Bennett. She picked up the phone, speaking in hushed tones as she glanced nervously at Andre. Moments later, Captain Evelyn Moore appeared from her office, her expression serious. Mr. Bennett, she greeted him, extending her hand. Thank you for coming in. Please, follow me. Andre nodded and followed her through the station, his eyes focused ahead. The officers who passed them on their way exchanged awkward glances, no doubt aware of the reason for his visit. Captain Moore led him into a small, private meeting room, where Officer Turner was already seated, his face set in an uncomfortable scowl. Turner's posture was stiff, his eyes flickering between Andre and Captain Moore as they entered the room. He clearly wasn't pleased to be here, but he knew he had no choice. The moment Andre stepped into the room, the atmosphere thickened with tension. Please have a seat, Captain Moore said, motioning to the chair across from Turner. Andre sat down, keeping his gaze locked on the officer who had wronged his daughter. Captain Moore remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back as she began to speak. Mr. Bennett, I want to personally apologize again for what happened to your daughter yesterday, she said, her voice measured. It was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for ensuring that we investigate this thoroughly. Officer Turner's actions are being reviewed as we speak. Andre didn't break eye contact with Turner, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I'm not here for apologies, Captain Moore, Andre said, his voice steady. I'm here to make sure that my daughter and no other child ever has to go through something like this again. Captain Moore nodded, clearly expecting this. I understand, and I agree with you. Officer Turner's conduct was inappropriate, and I'm working to ensure that proper measures are taken. Turner, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up, his voice defensive. I was just following protocol, he said, though there was a clear edge of frustration in his tone. She was defacing public property, and I handled it the way I would handle any case of vandalism. Andre's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You handcuffed a 9-year-old girl for drawing on the street with chalk, he said slowly. You didn't ask her any questions. You didn't speak to me or anyone else before you decided to treat her like a criminal? And you're telling me that's protocol? Turner's mouth twitched slightly, but he didn't respond. Captain Moore, sensing the escalating tension, stepped in. Officer Turner, she said sharply, this isn't just about protocol. This is about how you chose to handle the situation. A situation involving a child. Turner leaned forward, his voice rising slightly. I didn't know she was the mayor's daughter at the time. he muttered, clearly irritated. I was just trying to do my job. Andre's eyes flashed with anger, but he remained calm. It doesn't matter who she is. Whether she's the mayor's daughter or not, she's a child. And you failed to see that. All you saw was someone you assumed was doing something wrong. There was a heavy silence in the room as Turner stared down at the table, unwilling to meet Andre's gaze. Captain Moore took a deep breath before speaking again. Officer Turner has been suspended pending the outcome of our internal investigation, she explained, her tone formal. But, Mr. Bennett, I understand that this goes beyond just one officer's actions. We're committed to addressing the larger issues at play here. We're reviewing our training and procedures to ensure that nothing like this happens again. Andre leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes still focused on Turner. That's a start, he said slowly. But it's not enough. Captain Moore's expression remained serious. I understand. What would you like to see happen, Mr. Bennett? Andre paused for a moment, considering his words carefully. First, I want to see Officer Turner fired, he said, his voice firm but calm. Someone who reacts the way he did, without any thought for the person in front of him, has no place in this community, especially not in law enforcement. Turner's face tightened, but he remained silent, clearly realizing he wasn't going to win this argument. And second, Andre continued, I want real reforms in this department, better training on how to deal with children, on how to handle situations with care and understanding. This isn't just about my daughter. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Captain Moore nodded solemnly. I hear you, Mr. Bennett. I can't make any promises right now, but I will take your concerns seriously. We're committed to making changes, and your input is invaluable in that process. Andre stood up, his eyes locking onto Turner one last time. I expect to see action, he said firmly. This can't just be swept under the rug. Turner glanced up at him, his face tight with frustration, but he didn't say a word. Captain Moore stepped forward, extending her hand. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Bennett. I assure you, this matter will be handled. Andre shook her hand, his expression still hard. I'll be watching, he said simply, before turning to leave the room. As he walked out of the station, the weight of the day's events pressed heavily on his shoulders. He knew this wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a step toward justice. He had promised Jasmine that he would make things right, and he wasn't about to stop now. A few weeks had passed since the tense meeting at the police station, but Andre hadn't slowed down. He had kept up the pressure, making sure Captain Moore and the department knew he wasn't going to let Officer Turner's suspension be the end of it. He had spoken with local leaders, attended community meetings, and ensured that what happened to Jasmine remained a topic that couldn't be ignored. Today, Andre was sitting with Jasmine on the front porch, ready to explain what had happened since that awful day. She had been quiet, still processing everything, but Andre knew she deserved to know the truth, even if it was hard. Jasmine sat on the steps, her legs swinging back and forth as she doodled small shapes in her notebook. The weather was warmer now, with the sun beaming down on their quiet street. Andre watched her for a moment, gathering his thoughts before sitting beside her. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Jasmine looked up, a small smile on her face. Hi, Daddy, she said, though her voice had a hint of uncertainty. She hesitated for a moment before asking, Did you go back to the police station again? Andre nodded, his expression serious. Yes, I did, he said gently. We've been talking a lot about what happened, about Officer Turner and how they handled everything. Jasmine looked down at her notebook, tracing the lines with her pencil. Is he still working there? She asked, her voice quiet. Andre sighed, knowing the question was coming. No, he's not, he said. He's been suspended. That means he's not working right now while they investigate what happened. Jasmine's eyes widened slightly, and she looked up at her father. So, he's in trouble? She asked, her voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Andre nodded. Yes, he is. What he did was wrong, and they're figuring out what to do about it. He's not allowed to go back to work until they finish looking into everything. Jasmine seemed to absorb his words carefully, her small brow furrowed in thought. Will he ever come back? She asked softly. Andre leaned forward, looking directly into her eyes. That's what I'm working to make sure of, he said firmly. I don't want him to come back. He shouldn't be a police officer after what he did to you. Jasmine was quiet for a moment, processing everything. Then she looked down at her hands, her voice small. I'm glad he's not working right now, she whispered. He scared me, Daddy. I don't want him to scare anyone else. Andre's heart ached hearing her say that. He reached out, gently stroking her hair. I know, baby. And that's why I've been talking to the police, to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. They're looking at how things were handled, and they're going to make changes. Jasmine glanced up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. What kind of changes? She asked. Andre smiled gently, trying to keep things simple. They're going to make sure that police officers are trained better, especially when it comes to handling situations with kids, he explained. They're going to learn how to talk to people instead of just jumping to conclusions. That way, what happened to you won't happen again. Jasmine bit her lip, still thinking. Is it going to work, Daddy? She asked hesitantly. Andre nodded, though he knew it wouldn't be an easy or quick fix. It's a start, he said. It's going to take time, but by pushing for these changes, we're making sure they learn how to do better. It's important that we keep speaking up, like we've been doing. Jasmine looked back down at her notebook, her fingers tracing the drawings she had made earlier. I hope they listen, she said quietly. Because what he did was really mean. Andre nodded, his heart heavy. I hope they do too, sweetheart. And I'm going to keep making sure they do. For a moment, they sat together in silence, the sun warming their skin. Andre could see that Jasmine was still carrying some of the weight of what happened. But there was also a quiet strength in her. She had gone through something terrible, but she was still his bright, resilient daughter. Jasmine broke the silence first. Daddy? She asked softly, glancing up at him. Can I still draw outside? Andre smiled, the love and pride he felt for her filling his heart. Of course you can, he said, his voice full of warmth. This is your home, and you should never be afraid to do what makes you happy. You keep drawing, Jasmine. Don't let anyone take that from you. Jasmine smiled back, the corners of her eyes crinkling as she nodded. Okay, she said quietly, a hint of determination in her voice. As they sat together, the weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift just a little. Andre knew there was still more work to be done, both in the police department and in the community. But for now, they could take comfort in the progress they had made. He had fought for his daughter, and he wasn't going to stop until justice was fully served. Jasmine picked up her chalk from beside the porch, her small fingers gripping it tightly. I think I'm going to draw a big rainbow today, she said with a grin. Andre chuckled softly, nodding. That sounds like a great idea. Make it as big and bright as you can. Jasmine giggled and ran down to the sidewalk, where she began drawing the outline of a massive rainbow, her hands working quickly as bright colors filled the pavement. As Andre watched her, a sense of peace settled over him. He had kept his promise to his daughter, and though the fight wasn't over, today was a victory. Jasmine was outside again, drawing with chalk, fearless, joyful, and free. And this time, as she created her masterpiece, there was no officer coming to stop her, only the bright colors of her imagination stretching across the street, filling the space with life once again. A few more weeks had passed, and though Officer Turner was still suspended, Andre knew his work wasn't over. The investigation was dragging on, and there was still no final word on whether Turner would be permanently removed from the force. The community had rallied behind Andre, but he wasn't willing to take any chances. He needed to make sure that the department followed through on its promises, not just for Jasmine's sake, but for every child who could face the same treatment. Andre had one more meeting at the police station scheduled today, this time with the police chief and Captain Moore. He knew this meeting would be crucial, the final push to ensure that Turner's suspension turned into something permanent, and that the changes the department had promised weren't just words on paper. As Andre arrived at the station, the air felt different. There was an anticipation in the air, as if the weight of everything that had happened was finally coming to a head. He walked in with a calm determination, greeted by respectful nods from officers who now recognized the gravity of the situation. He wasn't just the mayor, he was a father who had fought relentlessly for his daughter's justice. Captain Moore met him at the front and led him to the chief's office. The police chief, an older man with graying hair and a thoughtful expression, sat behind his desk, waiting as Andre entered. Captain Moore stood by his side, her face serious as ever. Mr. Bennett, the chief greeted him, gesturing to the seat across from him. Thank you for meeting with us again. I know this process has taken longer than expected. Andre sat down, his eyes steady as he looked at both of them. It has, he agreed. But I'm here because I need to know that something real is going to come from this. The chief nodded, leaning forward slightly. I understand, he said. I want to assure you that Officer Turner's actions were thoroughly reviewed. We've concluded that his behavior was not in line with our standards, and as of today, I've made the decision to recommend his permanent dismissal from the department. Andre's chest tightened for a moment, and he let out a slow breath. It was what he had been fighting for, what Jasmine deserved. So, he's going to be fired? Andre asked, his voice calm but firm, needing to hear it plainly. The chief nodded again. Yes, Turner will no longer serve as an officer in this department. His suspension will transition to termination. Andre sat back in his chair, feeling the tension that had been building for weeks finally release. "That's the right decision," he said simply, though the weight of those words meant everything to him. Captain Moore spoke up then, her tone thoughtful. "We've also made headway on the changes we discussed, Mr. Bennett," she said. "We've begun implementing new training protocols for all our officers, focusing on de-escalation and how to interact with children. We've also instituted new review processes for incidents like this to ensure that there's accountability from the start." Andre nodded, appreciating the effort. But he wasn't done yet. "That's good," he said, "but it's not enough just to change the way officers are trained. This department needs to build trust again, not just with my family, but with the whole community." The chief leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. It's going to take time to repair the damage that was done, not just to your daughter, but to the trust between this department and the community. I'd like to involve you in those efforts, Mr. Bennett." Andre raised an eyebrow, interested in where this was going. "What do you have in mind?" "We're planning to hold community meetings, forums where residents can speak directly with officers and voice their concerns," the chief explained. "We want to hear from people, and we want to be transparent about the changes we're making. Your involvement would help bridge that gap." Andre considered it. He had spent so much time fighting for justice that the idea of being part of the solution felt right. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if I see real, lasting change." "This isn't about putting a Band-Aid on the problem," the chief nodded solemnly. "Understood. We're committed to making this right," Captain Moore added. "Your presence will help hold us accountable, Mr. Bennett. It's one thing for the police to talk about reform, but it's another to have someone who has lived through this experience pushing us to keep our word." Andre couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had fought this battle for Jasmine, but now it was about more than just her. It was about making sure no other child had to face what she did. It was about building something better for their community. "I'll hold you to that," Andre said, his voice firm. "I'll work with you to make this right, but if I see any backtracking or half measures, I won't hesitate to speak out." The chief stood up, extending his hand. "We're looking forward to working with you." Andre shook his hand, his grip strong and sure. "So am I." Later that evening, Andre and Jasmine sat together on the porch again, the soft hum of the neighborhood around them. Jasmine was back to her chalk, drawing more flowers and rainbows on the sidewalk, her usual joy restored. It felt different now, lighter. The fear and uncertainty that had weighed so heavily on her seemed to have finally lifted. Jasmine looked up from her drawing, her eyes bright. "Daddy, are you still working with the police?" Andre nodded, smiling at her. "Yeah, baby. We're going to make sure things get better. Not just for us, but for everyone." Jasmine grinned, looking back at her drawing. "I'm glad. I don't want anyone else to feel scared like I did." Andre's heart swelled with pride. He knew there was still work to be done, but this moment, seeing his daughter happy and safe, felt like a victory. He had fought for her, and now they were building something better together. As Jasmine finished her rainbow, Andre knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like they were moving in the right direction, toward healing, justice, and real change. Months had passed since the day Officer Turner was officially dismissed from the police department. Andre had thrown himself into the work of reform, collaborating with the police and the community to ensure that real change took root. It hadn't been easy. Change never was. But slowly, the impact of his efforts was beginning to show. The community forums had been a huge success, with people from all walks of life coming forward to voice their experiences, concerns, and ideas for how to improve the relationship between the police and the neighborhoods they served. Andre had been there for every meeting, pushing for transparency and accountability at every turn. He had become a bridge between the people and the police, ensuring that the department stayed true to its promises of reform. Today, Andre and Jasmine were attending one of the final community events in a long series of reforms aimed at rebuilding trust. The event was held at a local park, where families had gathered to hear about the new policies the police department was implementing. Jasmine skipped beside her father, her spirits high, holding his hand as they walked. "Are we going to meet the police again?" Jasmine asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Andre smiled down at her. "We are," he said, "but this time, it's going to be different. They're here to show the community the changes they've made. Things are going to be better now, Jasmine." Jasmine nodded thoughtfully, her grip on his hand tightening. "Good," she said simply. "I don't want any more kids to be scared." Andre's heart warmed at her words. Jasmine's resilience had inspired him every day since the incident, and knowing that she felt safer now made all the hard work worth it. As they reached the park, they were greeted by Captain Moore, who was overseeing the event. Her demeanor had shifted since that first tense meeting. Now she looked less like an enforcer and more like a partner in the effort to rebuild the community's trust. She smiled warmly as Andre and Jasmine approached. "Mr. Bennett, Jasmine," she greeted them. "I'm glad you could make it." Jasmine gave a small smile, hiding behind her father just a bit. Andre nodded to Captain Moore. "We wouldn't miss it. I hear the department's got some big updates to share today." Captain Moore's face brightened. "Yes, we've been working hard on the reforms. We've implemented new training programs across the entire force, focusing on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and interacting with youth. We've also launched a new community outreach initiative to build better relationships with the neighborhoods we serve." Andre smiled, appreciating the progress. "It's good to hear," he said. "But you know I'll keep making sure you follow through." Captain Moore chuckled lightly. "I wouldn't expect anything less," she said. "But honestly, this has been a learning process for all of us. I think we're moving in the right direction." As they continued to talk, other officers joined the event, mingling with the families who had gathered. This time, there was no tension in the air, just conversation, laughter, and a feeling of hope. The officers were approachable, taking time to speak with children and parents alike, answering questions, and explaining the changes that had been made to the way they operated. Jasmine watched the scene with curiosity. She had been cautious around police officers ever since her arrest, but today something felt different. She tugged on her father's sleeve, looking up at him. "Daddy, can I go talk to them?" Andre hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Of course, baby. Go ahead." Jasmine let go of his hand and walked over to one of the officers who was showing some kids how to draw with sidewalk chalk, something they had set up specifically for this event, as a nod to what had started the whole journey for Jasmine. She smiled shyly, watching the officer draw a flower on the pavement. The officer, noticing her interest, smiled warmly. "Want to give it a try?" he asked, holding out a piece of blue chalk. Jasmine hesitated, glancing back at her father, who gave her an encouraging nod. Slowly, she took the chalk from the officer's hand and knelt down beside him, carefully adding her own drawing to the pavement. Soon, other children joined in, creating a colorful mural that spread across the walkway. The officer knelt beside them, laughing and offering tips on their drawings. Andre watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. This was the world he wanted for his daughter, one where she could be herself, safe, and free to express her creativity without fear. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was better than it had been before. Captain Moore stood beside Andre, watching the scene unfold. "You've done a lot to get us here, Mr. Bennett," she said quietly. "I hope you know that." Andre nodded, his eyes on Jasmine. "We all have," he replied. "But there's still more work to do. This isn't the end." Captain Moore smiled. "No, it's not," she agreed. "But it's a good start." As the event continued, Andre and Jasmine walked around the park, stopping to talk with families and officers alike. The conversations were full of hope and possibility, with parents thanking Andre for his relentless efforts and police officers assuring them that they were committed to doing better. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Jasmine and Andre sat on a bench together, watching the colors fade from the sky. Jasmine rested her head on her father's shoulder, a peaceful smile on her face. "Daddy," she said softly, "I think everything's going to be okay now." Andre smiled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Yeah, baby," he said, his voice full of warmth. "I think you're right. The fight for justice wasn't over. There would always be more to do, more to fix. But today, as Andre looked around at the community that had come together, he felt something new. He felt hope. Jasmine was safe, and the world around her was changing for the better. That was enough for now. As they stood up to leave, Jasmine picked up a piece of chalk from the ground and handed it to her father, grinning. "Your turn to draw, Daddy." Andre laughed, taking the chalk from her. Together they knelt on the sidewalk, adding their own bright colors to the mural of change they had helped create, one that would keep growing, day by day. And as they walked home, hand in hand, Andre knew that their story wasn't just about what had happened, but about what was still to come. It was a new beginning.